By all geographic logic, Louisiana should be one of the most powerful places in the United States. Look at a map of Louisiana, and the advantage seems obvious almost immediately. The state sits directly at the mouth of the Mississippi River, the single most important river system on the entire continent. For thousands of kilometers, the Mississippi gathers water, cargo, and economic activity from deep inside North America. It drains a massive portion of the continent, connecting dozens of states and some of the most productive farmland on Earth. And all of that water and all of that trade ultimately flows to one place: the coast of Louisiana. Geographically speaking, that should make Louisiana unbelievably powerful. Think about it. The Mississippi River system touches or connects with huge portions of the United States, including states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, and Iowa, before eventually draining into the Gulf of Mexico. This enormous river basin covers roughly 40% of the entire continental United States. Grain from the Midwest, steel from the Great Lakes, coal from Appalachia, oil, and chemicals from the Gulf Coast. All of it can move along this inland water highway, and every single shipment eventually funnels through Louisiana. By pure geographic logic, that position should have turned Louisiana into something like the New York of the South, a mega economic hub controlling the gateway between North America's interior and the global ocean. And for a moment in history, it almost did. The city of New Orleans once stood as one of the most important ports in the world. In the 19th century, it was the largest city in the American South and one of the busiest trading centers on the continent. Cotton, sugar, tobacco, and grain poured through its docks. Ships from Europe, the Caribbean, and Latin America crowded its harbor. It was a place where cultures mixed, languages blended, and fortunes were made. But something strange happened. Despite this incredible geographic advantage, Louisiana never became the dominant economic powerhouse it theoretically should have been. Instead, the state has struggled with stagnant economic growth, infrastructure problems, and environmental disasters that seem almost uniquely concentrated here. In fact, Louisiana is currently facing a geographic problem so serious that it threatens the very land the state is built on. Because the ground itself is sinking. Coastal wetlands are disappearing at an alarming rate. And the very river that created Louisiana in the first place is now trying to escape it. To understand how such a strategically perfect location became one of the greatest missed opportunities in American geography, we need to look at the strange and unpredictable relationship between Louisiana and the Mississippi River itself. The state built by a river that refuses to stay still. The first thing you need to understand about Louisiana is that it barely qualifies as stable land. In fact, calling much of southern Louisiana land is already a bit generous. Geologically, this region is less like a normal piece of the United States and more like a giant hydrological construction site built by the Mississippi River over thousands of years. Over roughly the last 7,000 years, the Mississippi carried enormous amounts of sediment southward from the interior of North America. Mud, silt, sand, and clay eroded from farms, plains, hills, and mountains far upriver were transported toward the Gulf of Mexico. And when the river finally slowed near the coast, all that material began to fall out of the water and pile up. That is how southern Louisiana was made. Not by tectonic uplift, not by hard rock pushing upward, but by loose river mud slowly accumulating until it rose above sea level. Over time, this process created the Mississippi Delta, including the famous birdfoot shape that extends into the Gulf. And that detail explains almost everything. Because land made from loose sediment is unstable by default, southern Louisiana is not sitting on strong rock. It is sitting on thousands of feet of soft, wet, compacting muck. In much of the region, the water table sits just below the surface. Dig into the ground around New Orleans, and water appears almost immediately. That is not how most cities work. This means the land is naturally sinking all the time. As the weight of new sediment presses down on older layers, water gets squeezed out and the soil compacts. The surface slowly drops. But historically, The Mississippi had a built-in solution for that problem. Every year, the river flooded, and every flood deposited a fresh layer of mud across the delta. So the sinking was constantly offset by rebuilding. It was a natural maintenance system. The river built the land sank, and the river rebuilt it again. Then humans intervened. And that's where Louisiana's long-term geographic crisis really begins. Southern Louisiana is also unusual because the line between land and water is often hard to define. In most parts of the world, you can point to a coastline and say, that's where the land ends. In Louisiana, the coast is more like a blurry negotiation between marsh, swamp, bayou, and open water. This is the famous bayou country. Huge marshes of grass act like natural storm absorbers, softening hurricane surges before they hit populated areas. Cypress swamps dominate other parts of the landscape, creating dark, watery forests that look almost prehistoric. And then there are chenier ridges, old beach formations that form some of the only slightly elevated ground in the region. In Louisiana, high ground can mean just 5 or 10 feet above sea level, which is enough to matter a lot. Historically, moving through this world was not really about crossing land. It was about learning how to travel through a liquid landscape. Indigenous communities understood that. Early outsiders usually didn't. But not all of Louisiana looks like this. North of Alexandria, the geography changes dramatically. The alluvial plains give way to older uplands, rolling hills, pine forests, and better draining soils. This part of the state feels much more like East Texas or southern Arkansas than the swampy image most people associate with Louisiana. Geologically, it is older, firmer, and far easier to build on. But the most important geographic fact in the whole state isn't the swamp, the marsh, or the uplands. It's the Mississippi River's instinct to move. People often think of rivers as fixed channels, like pipelines drawn on a map. But real rivers are restless. They meander, shift, and eventually abandon old routes when a new path becomes more efficient. And the Mississippi has done exactly that many times. Over thousands of years, it has switched between different delta lobes across coastal Louisiana, building land in one place, then abandoning it and moving elsewhere. This is normal river behavior. Right now, however, the Mississippi wants to leave its present route past Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Physically, it wants to shift westward into the Atchafalaya River, which offers a shorter and steeper path to the Gulf of Mexico. From the river's perspective, that route simply makes more sense. If nature had been left alone, the shift likely would have happened decades ago. And that would have changed Louisiana overnight. New Orleans and Baton Rouge would no longer sit on the continent's main shipping channel. Their port advantages would collapse. Their economic relevance would shrink dramatically. What made Louisiana strategically powerful in the first place would be redirected elsewhere. So Louisiana lives with a bizarre paradox. The river that created the state is also trying to abandon it, and the state's entire economic role depends on preventing that from happening. This is why Louisiana is not just a place with a river. It is a place in a permanent argument with one empires, refugees, and the birth of Louisiana. Long before Louisiana became a state in the United States, the Mississippi River Delta was already a crossroads of civilizations. Thousands of years ago, long before Europeans ever reached North America, indigenous societies had already built complex communities across the region. One of the most remarkable examples was the Poverty Point, where massive earthworks and ceremonial mounds were constructed more than 3,000 years ago. These weren't primitive settlements. They were large, organized societies capable of coordinating labor on a huge scale. Archaeological discoveries show that people living there traded materials across enormous distances. Stone tools found at the site originated from regions as far away as the Appalachian Mountains and the Great Lakes. This tells us something important. The Mississippi Basin was already functioning as a continental trade network thousands of years before Europeans arrived. By the time European explorers began pushing into the region, the territory that would become Louisiana was controlled by numerous indigenous nations, including the Choctaw, Caddo, Natchez, and Chitimacha. These societies understood the Delta in ways that baffled early European explorers. Where Europeans saw impassable swamp, They saw highways of water. They traveled through the bayous in dugout canoes, navigating narrow channels and seasonal wetlands that outsiders often couldn't even map correctly. But when Europeans arrived, they weren't looking for a place to live. They were looking for control. In 1682, the French explorer René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de La Salle, traveled down the Mississippi River all the way from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. When he reached the river's mouth, he made an extraordinary claim. He declared the entire Mississippi drainage basin to be territory of Louis XIV, naming it La Louisiane. On paper, this meant France now controlled a region stretching from the Rocky Mountains all the way to the Appalachian Mountains. But claiming land was easy. Holding it was another story. French strategists quickly realized that whoever controlled the mouth of the Mississippi River controlled the entire interior of North America. So in 1718, the colonial administrator Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne de Bienville founded the city of New Orleans. Geographically, the location was perfect, but environmentally, it was awful. The city sat between the Mississippi River and Lake Pontchartrain, surrounded by wetlands and mosquito-infested swamps. Early settlers died from malaria and yellow fever at frightening rates. Many historians note that New Orleans almost failed several times in its earliest decades. Yet the city survived. And tragically, much of the labor that made that possible came from enslaved Africans who built levees, drained wetlands, and constructed the early infrastructure of the colony. Then the map changed again. In 1762, after France lost the 7 Years' War, Louisiana was secretly transferred to Spain. For nearly 40 years, the colony was Spanish. This explains why the famous French Quarter actually contains many Spanish-style buildings, iron balconies, and courtyard houses. During this time, another major cultural group arrived. The Acadians were driven from Canada by the British and eventually settled in the remote swamps of southern Louisiana. Over generations, their name evolved into Cajun. Living in isolation among the bayous, they created a distinct language, cuisine, and culture that still defines much of Louisiana today. Then came one of the most important land deals in world history. In 1803, Napoleon Bonaparte sold the entire Louisiana territory to the United States. The Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the young United States overnight. And suddenly, the Mississippi River became the most valuable economic highway on the continent. For decades afterward, steamboats carried cotton, timber, grain, and sugar down the river to New Orleans. By the mid-1800s, the city had become one of the wealthiest trading ports in the world. But this prosperity had a fragile foundation. It depended heavily on plantation agriculture and enslaved labor. When the American Civil War erupted, New Orleans became an immediate target. In 1862, Union naval forces captured the city. And with the collapse of slavery and the plantation system, Louisiana's old economy never fully recovered. But just as the state seemed to be fading into decline, a new resource was discovered: oil. And that discovery would transform Louisiana in ways nobody expected. The geography that is slowly destroying Louisiana. Today, Louisiana faces a strange and difficult reality. Geographically, it should be one of the most important states in the United States. But instead, it is fighting a constant battle just to keep its land from disappearing. The biggest reason is simple. The Mississippi River Delta is not stable. Because the river is now confined by levees, it can no longer flood naturally and deposit fresh sediment across the delta. Without those regular deposits of new mud, the coastline is slowly eroding. Wetlands that once protected the region from storms are vanishing. Barrier islands are shrinking. And salt water from the Gulf of Mexico is pushing farther inland every year. The numbers are alarming. Louisiana is currently losing roughly a football field of land every 100 minutes. Entire marshes that once existed on maps decades ago have already disappeared beneath the sea. And this erosion creates a dangerous chain reaction. Wetlands act as natural storm buffers. Without them, hurricanes reach cities with much greater force. This makes storms like Hurricane Katrina even more destructive. But the most important risk in Louisiana still comes from the Mississippi River itself. Rivers naturally change course over time. And the Mississippi wants to switch to a shorter route toward the Gulf through the Atchafalaya River. If that happened, the main shipping channel would shift west. Cities like Baton Rouge and New Orleans would lose their position along the continent's primary trade artery. Their ports would decline dramatically. And the economic importance of southern Louisiana could collapse almost overnight. To stop this from happening, the United States built one of the most important pieces of infrastructure most people have never heard of: the Old River Control Structure. This massive complex of gates and channels forces the Mississippi River to remain in its current path. If it ever failed during a major flood, the river could instantly change direction, and the economic consequences would ripple across the entire country, which leaves Louisiana in a strange position. While other states are building new industries and planning for future growth, Louisiana is spending billions of dollars simply trying to hold its geography in place. It is defending land that is sinking, holding back a river that wants to move, and rebuilding coastlines that storms keep erasing. When you look at a map, Louisiana appears to have the perfect location. It sits at the mouth of the most important river in North America. It connects the interior of the continent to global trade, and it acts as the gateway between America's agricultural heartland and the world. But geography doesn't always give easy advantages. Sometimes it creates impossible challenges. Louisiana is built on land that naturally sinks, protected by wetlands that are disappearing, and dominated by a river that constantly tries to escape. In many ways, the state didn't simply fall behind. It became trapped between economic opportunity and geographic reality. And that tension still defines Louisiana today. If you enjoy this exploration into how geography can shape the destiny of entire regions, be sure to subscribe. And if you want to see another place where geography quietly determines the future of millions of people, I'll see you in the next one.